Commander Zaina Kavarin straightened her ceremonial armor as she approached the holding cell. The metallic scales that covered her deep purple skin shimmered under the harsh light of the corridor. As the highest-ranking military officer on the research vessel Nebula Seeker, it was her duty to interrogate their newest specimen, a human male captured during their reconnaissance of Earth's outer colonies. "Status report," she commanded, her voice carrying the distinctive harmonic undertone of all Valari. Lieutenant Dren saluted sharply. "The human has been processed according to protocol, Commander. Minimal resistance during capture, though he attempted to escape twice during transport. No significant injuries." Zaina nodded. "Interesting. Their intelligence reports suggested humans would be more fragile. This one seems different," Dren added hesitantly. "He's been studying us as much as we've been studying him." That piqued Zaina's curiosity. The Valari Science Directorate had classified humans as a primitive species, resourceful but ultimately no match for superior Valari technology and biology. Yet the reports from their scouts had been inconsistent, suggesting humans were more adaptable than initially believed. "I'll handle the interrogation personally," she decided. "Continue monitoring from the observation deck." The cell door slid open with a soft hiss. Inside, a human male sat on a simple bench, apparently relaxed despite his captivity. He looked up as she entered, and Zaina was struck by the intensity of his gaze. Unlike the timid response she expected, he assessed her with calm calculation. "Commander Ethan Drake, Earth Defense Force," he said before she could speak, his voice deeper than she had anticipated. "And you would be?" Zaina concealed her surprise. "You are in no position to ask questions, human." Drake shrugged, a gesture Zaina found oddly expressive. "Just trying to establish diplomatic protocol. Usually when advanced species meet, they exchange names before the interrogation begins." "I am Commander Zaina Kavarin of the Valari Exploration Fleet," she replied, finding herself following his lead despite her intention to maintain dominance. "And this is not an interrogation. It is a scientific assessment." A small smile played at the corners of his mouth. "Is that what you're calling it?" Because the restraints and cell suggested something less academic. Zaina circled him slowly, noting his physiology. While the basic structure matched their intelligence reports, bipedal, endoskeletal, mammalian, she observed differences that intrigued her. His muscles were more defined than expected, and there was a steadiness to his breathing that suggested training beyond what their reports indicated for standard human military personnel. "Your species has been classified as non-threatening," she stated, "but preliminary findings suggest you may have been underestimated." "We tend to exceed expectations," Drake replied. "It's a human specialty." Zaina activated her data tablet, bringing up the questionnaire developed by the Science Directorate. Standard procedure dictated she follow it precisely, but something about this human made her hesitate. "Why were you alone at an observation post 7 light-years from your nearest colony?" she asked instead. Drake raised an eyebrow. "Why do you think I'd tell you that?" "Because cooperation would improve your conditions considerably." "And non-cooperation?" Zaina met his gaze directly. "Would be unpleasant." To her surprise, Drake laughed, a sound that sent an unexpected shiver along her spine ridges. "You know, Commander Zaina, your intimidation techniques need work. You're too curious to damage a specimen you clearly find interesting." The accuracy of his assessment disrupted her practiced composure. Humans weren't supposed to be this perceptive of Valari emotional states. "Our intelligence suggests humans are primarily driven by fear," she countered, trying to regain control of the exchange. Drake leaned forward, and Zaina found herself noticing the strange appeal of his features, so alien yet somehow compelling. "Then your intelligence is incomplete," he said quietly. "We're driven by many things. Curiosity, for one. Just like you appear to be, Commander." Zaina realized with a start that she had moved closer to him, drawn in by their exchange. She stepped back, recalibrating her approach. Perhaps we could benefit from a cultural exchange, she suggested, surprising herself with the proposal. You answer my questions about humans, and I'll answer yours about Valari. An actual conversation instead of an interrogation? Drake's expression softened slightly. That would be a welcome change. Something shifted in the atmosphere between them, not quite trust, but a mutual recognition. Two warriors from different worlds, each reassessing what they thought they knew about the other. Let's begin again, Ethan Drake, Zaina said, using his name for the first time. Tell me about humans. 3 cycles had passed since Ethan Drake's capture, and Commander Zaina found herself anticipating their daily sessions with uncharacteristic eagerness. What had begun as a formal interrogation had evolved into something unprecedented in Valari scientific history, a genuine cultural exchange. Today, she had arranged for Ethan to be transferred to the ship's observation deck rather than conducting their meeting in his cell. The science directorate would question her judgment, but Zaina had justified it as necessary for gathering more comprehensive data on human responses to Valari technology. When the guards escorted Ethan into the vast chamber, Zaina observed his reaction carefully. His eyes widened as he took in the panoramic view of stars streaking past at sublight speed, his lips parting slightly in what she had learned was an expression of awe. This is incredible, he said, approaching the transparent alloy viewport. Your propulsion systems must be at least 3 generations beyond our most advanced prototypes. Zaina moved to stand beside him, acutely aware of his proximity. The quantum fold drive was developed 6 centuries ago. Our engineers consider it rather primitive now. Ethan turned to her with a smile that caused an unexpected flutter in her secondary heart. Primitive is relative, Commander. 6 centuries ago, humans were still figuring out how to harness steam power. Yet you've achieved interstellar flight in a remarkably short evolutionary timeframe, Zaina noted. It's one reason the science directorate finds your species worth studying. You mean worth capturing and interrogating, Ethan corrected, though without the hostility such a statement would have carried days ago. Zaina's facial scales shifted in what Ethan had come to recognize as her equivalent of a contemplative frown. I've been reviewing our protocols regarding first contact with developing species. They are, perhaps, more rigid than necessary. That sounds almost like criticism of your superiors, Ethan observed, raising an eyebrow. Analytical reassessment, she countered, though a flicker of amusement resonated in her harmonic tones. The Valari value precision above all. If our understanding is imprecise, it must be corrected. Ethan leaned against the viewport, studying her with those disconcertingly perceptive eyes. And what has made you think your understanding might be imprecise? You, Zaina admitted, surprising herself with her candor. You are not what our intelligence suggested humans would be. She activated a holographic display between them, bringing up comparative physiological scans of Ethan's body alongside Valari anatomical models. Your species appears physically inferior, lower muscle density, limited sensory capabilities, no natural defenses. Yet you've survived encounters that should have been fatal. Your cognitive adaptability exceeds our predictive models. Ethan crossed his arms, a gesture Zaina had come to associate with his defensive posture. We humans have a saying, it's not the size of the dog in the fight, but the size of the fight in the dog. Zaina's translation implant struggled with the idiom, and she tilted her head in confusion. It means determination often matters more than physical advantages, Ethan explained. Humans have survived because we refuse to accept limitations. When we can't outmuscle a problem, we outthink it. An admirable quality, Zaina conceded. Though dangerous in a potential adversary. Ethan's expression sobered. Is that what we are? Adversaries? The question hung between them, laden with implications neither had fully addressed until now. Zaina found herself at an uncharacteristic loss for words. I was assigned to assess the human threat level, she finally said. That was my mission. And what have you assessed? Ethan asked quietly. Zaina deactivated the holographic display, leaving nothing between them but empty space and unspoken possibilities. That threat assessments are sometimes too simplistic, she replied. Especially when dealing with complex beings. Their eyes met, and Zaina became acutely aware of a shift in the ship's atmospheric processors, or perhaps it was simply her own elevated body temperature affecting her perception. I've shared my culture's scientific achievements with you, she said, deliberately changing the subject. Perhaps you could tell me about human artistic expression. Our intelligence suggests it's unusually varied for a single species. Ethan's face brightened in a way that caused Zaina's dermal luminescence to respond involuntarily, her scales emitting a faint purple glow. Art is how we make sense of the universe, he said passionately. Music, literature, visual arts, they're not just entertainment. They're how we process what it means to be human. Can you demonstrate? Zaina asked, genuinely curious. Ethan considered for a moment, then began to sing, a melody so hauntingly beautiful that Zaina's translator didn't attempt to process it, allowing the raw emotion of his voice to wash over her. The song spoke of distances crossed, of longing and hope, in a way no Valari composition ever had. When he finished, the observation deck was silent except for the low hum of the ship's engines. That was. I have no classification for that experience, Zaina admitted, her voice uncharacteristically soft. It's an old Earth song about explorers searching for new horizons, Ethan explained. It seemed appropriate, given our circumstances. Indeed. Zaina found herself moving closer to him, drawn by something beyond scientific curiosity. Your species expresses emotion with remarkable intensity. We feel things deeply, Ethan said, his eyes never leaving hers. It's our strength and our weakness. The Valari are taught that emotion clouds judgment, Zaina told him. But I'm beginning to question that assumption as well. Ethan reached out slowly, giving her time to retreat, and gently touched the luminescent scales on her forearm. The contact sent a cascade of sensations through Zaina's nervous system, unlike anything she had experienced before. Sometimes, he said softly, judgment needs a little clouding. The ship's communication system chimed, shattering the moment. Commander Kavarin, Lieutenant Dren's voice reported, Admiral Tesvar requests your presence for a priority transmission from the High Command regarding the human specimen. Zaina stepped back, her professional demeanor reasserting itself with practiced efficiency. Acknowledged. Return the human to secure quarters. As the guards approached, Ethan gave her a look that contained both understanding and something more complex. Thank you for the view, Commander, he said formally, but his eyes conveyed a different message entirely. Watching him being escorted away, Zaina realized that what had begun as a simple scientific assessment had evolved into something far more dangerous, and far more profound, than she could have anticipated. Admiral Tesvar's holographic form dominated the command center, his ancient scales bearing the distinctive metallic sheen of the Valari military elite. Zaina stood at attention, her posture perfect despite the turmoil in her thoughts. Commander Kavarin, the admiral began, his harmonics resonating with disapproval, your reports on the human specimen have been concerning. Zaina kept her expression neutral. Concerning, Admiral? They suggest a level of engagement inappropriate for objective scientific assessment. The Admiral's crest flared slightly. The High Command expected standardized interrogation protocols. Instead, you appear to be conducting a cultural exchange program. With respect, Admiral, Zaina replied carefully, standard protocols proved ineffective with this subject. Humans respond better to reciprocal communication strategies. Your justifications are noted, Tesvar said dismissively. However, the Science Directorate has reviewed your findings and determined that the specimen should be transferred to the Central Research Facility immediately. A cold sensation spread through Zaina's core. The central research facility was where specimens underwent invasive procedures. Few emerged with their consciousness intact. The human has provided valuable intelligence voluntarily, she argued. Invasive procedures would compromise. Your recommendation is irrelevant, Commander, Tesvar interrupted. The transfer order has been approved at the highest level. The extraction vessel will rendezvous with your ship in 6 cycles. The transmission ended abruptly, leaving Zaina alone with a decision that would define her life's path. When Zaina entered Ethan's quarters later that cycle, she found him engaged in what he had described as meditation, a human practice of mental discipline that had initially struck her as primitive but which she now recognized held surprising depth. He opened his eyes as she approached, immediately sensing her distress. "Bad news?" he asked. Zaina hesitated, then made a decision that went against everything in her training. "The High Command has ordered your transfer to our central research facility." Ethan's face remained calm, but she detected the slight increase in his heart rate through her biomonitor. "I take it this isn't for a more comfortable room and better food." "They will dissect your mind before your body," Zaina said bluntly. "Everything that makes you, will be catalogued and destroyed." Ethan stood slowly. "So this is where our cultural exchange ends?" "No." The word escaped before she could analyze its implications. Not if we leave." His eyes widened. "Leave? You mean escape? Both of us?" Zaina's scales rippled with anxiety, but her voice remained steady. "What I've learned from you contradicts everything the Science Directorate has taught about humans. If they proceed with invasive protocols, valuable data will be lost forever." A small smile touched Ethan's lips. "That's a very scientific justification for what sounds like a personal decision." "The Valari do not make personal decisions," she replied automatically, then paused. "Or perhaps that is another assumption I need to reconsider." Ethan moved closer, close enough that she could detect the unique scent of his skin, a scent that had become strangely appealing over their time together. "Why would you risk everything for me?" he asked quietly. Zaina met his gaze directly. "Because you have shown me that there is more to understanding a species than dissecting its members. Because what we've begun here could lead to genuine alliance rather than conquest." "And?" Ethan prompted gently. "And because I cannot bear the thought of your consciousness being erased," she admitted, her harmonics betraying emotion she would once have suppressed. "You are unique, Ethan Drake." He reached out, his fingers lightly touching the luminescent scales along her jawline. This time, she didn't pull away. "So are you, Zaina Kavarin," he whispered. For a moment, they stood suspended in possibility, two beings from worlds light years apart, connected by something neither had expected to find. Then Zaina stepped back, her military training reasserting itself. "We have 5 cycles before the extraction vessel arrives. I can access an emergency shuttle, but security protocols will detect unauthorized launches." Ethan's expression shifted to one of focused determination, the warrior replacing the philosopher. "Then we create a distraction. Something significant enough to override standard security protocols." "The quantum stabilizers," Zaina said suddenly. "If they detected a potential breach in the drive containment field, they'd initiate emergency protocols," Ethan finished. "Directing all security resources to prevent a catastrophic failure." Zaina nodded, surprised by how intuitively he grasped Valari ship operations. "I can program a false reading in the monitoring system. It would trigger full containment procedures, including the automatic preparation of emergency shuttles." "Would anyone be hurt?" Ethan asked, his concern genuine. The question touched Zaina unexpectedly. Even facing imprisonment and worse, his first thought was for potential casualties. "No," she assured him. "It would cause disruption and some fear, but no physical harm." "Then that's our plan." Ethan's expression grew serious. "But Zaina, you need to be certain." This isn't just breaking protocol, it's treason against your people. The highest loyalty of a Valari is to truth, she replied. What I've learned from you is truth. What the Science Directorate plans is the destruction of truth. She activated her data tablet, accessing the ship's schematics. We'll need to move quickly once the alarm sounds. The shuttle bay will be chaotic, but security forces will be focused on the drive section. As they began plotting details, Zaina was acutely aware that she was crossing a threshold from which there would be no return. Her career, her standing among her people, possibly her life, all would be forfeit. Yet watching Ethan as he analyzed the ship's layout with remarkable acuity, she found herself experiencing an emotion rare among the duty-bound Valari, certainty. Not the cold certainty of scientific classification, but the warm certainty of knowing one's true path. The nearest neutral territory is the Meridian Cluster, she told him, bringing up a star chart. It's populated by several species with diplomatic ties to both humans and Valari. We could seek sanctuary while attempting to establish communication with your government. Ethan studied the chart, then looked up at her with an expression that sent a cascade of neural responses through her system. Whatever happens, he said softly, I want you to know that what we've shared, this exchange between us, it matters. Not just for our species, but for me. For who I am now because I've known you. Zaina felt her secondary heart accelerate its rhythm. The Valari do not have a word for what exists between us, she admitted. Our language lacks the necessary concepts. Then perhaps, Ethan suggested, his hand finding hers, fingers intertwining in a gesture that bridged their biological differences, we'll have to create new concepts together. The ship's chronometer chimed, marking the beginning of the sleep cycle. Soon, the corridors would be minimally staffed, their best opportunity to access the systems they would need to modify. We should prepare, Zaina said, reluctantly withdrawing her hand from his. But as they finalized their plans, she knew with absolute clarity that whatever the outcome, she had already been transformed. Like the quantum particles she had studied all her life, she had become entangled with this human in ways that transcended physical space, ways that neither time nor distance could sever. Alarms blared throughout the Nebula Seeker as emergency lighting bathed the corridors in pulsing crimson. Zaina moved with practiced efficiency, her scaled fingers dancing across control panels as she finalized the false containment breach warnings. Status report. Lieutenant Dren's voice came through her communicator. Monitoring quantum fluctuations in Section 7, Zaina responded, her voice betraying none of her internal turmoil. Initiating emergency protocols. Direct all security personnel to the drive section. Acknowledged, Commander. Ethan waited in the shadows of a maintenance alcove, dressed in modified Valari environmental gear that Zaina had procured. The dark suit contrasted with his pale human skin, but in the chaos of the emergency, it would pass cursory inspection. Ship-wide systems are diverting power to containment fields, she informed him as she joined him in the alcove. Security barriers between here and Shuttle Bay 3 have been temporarily deactivated. Ethan nodded, his expression resolute. How long until they realize it's a false alarm? Engineering will detect the inconsistencies in approximately 17 minutes, Zaina replied. We need to be clear of the ship's tracking range by then. They moved through the corridors with careful haste, Zaina leading and Ethan matching her pace. Twice they had to duck into side passages as crew members rushed past, focused entirely on their emergency stations. As they approached the shuttle bay, Zaina felt a strange mixture of emotions, fear, certainly, but also an exhilarating sense of purpose unlike anything she had experienced in her years of dutiful service. There, she whispered, indicating a Type 7 shuttle positioned for emergency evacuation. It's pre-programmed for rapid departure. Once aboard, I can override the destination coordinates. They were mere meters from the shuttle when a voice called out behind them. Commander Kavarin. Zaina turned to find Lieutenant Dren standing at the bay entrance, his expression shifting from confusion to dawning comprehension as he noticed Ethan beside her. "What are you doing with the specimen?" he demanded, his hand moving toward his sidearm. "Lieutenant," Zaina began, her mind racing through options. "This is not what it appears." "It appears to be treason, Commander," Dren replied, his weapon now drawn. "Step away from the human." Ethan tensed beside her, but Zaina placed a restraining hand on his arm. Violence would only confirm the Valari perception of humans as dangerous primitives. "Dren," she said, using his name without rank, a significant breach of protocol that caused his crest to flare in surprise. "What we've been told about humans is incomplete. They are not specimens to be dissected. They are a sentient species with whom alliance would benefit our people far more than conquest." "You've been compromised," Dren stated flatly. "The human has affected your judgment." "Yes," Zaina admitted, surprising both Dren and herself with her candor. "But not in the way you think. He has shown me that our scientific objectivity has become a kind of blindness. We classify and categorize other beings without truly understanding them." "Whatever philosophical awakening you've experienced," Dren said, his weapon still trained on them, "it doesn't justify betraying your oath to the fleet." Ethan stepped forward slightly. "Lieutenant, your commander isn't betraying your people. She's trying to prevent a diplomatic catastrophe. If your leaders proceed with invasive research on a diplomatic representative of Earth, it could lead to interstellar conflict." "Diplomatic representative?" Dren's eyes narrowed. "You were captured at an observation post, alone." "A cover," Ethan replied smoothly. "Standard protocol for first contact scenarios. Single representative, deniable position, minimal risk to the primary diplomatic mission." Zaina glanced at Ethan, impressed by his quick thinking. It was a lie, but one with enough plausibility to create doubt. "The High Command has already," Dren began. "Has made a decision based on incomplete information," Zaina interrupted. "Information I was tasked with gathering. My assessment is that this human represents an opportunity, not a threat." The shuttle bay trembled slightly as the ship's engines adjusted to compensate for the supposed containment issue. Time was running short. "You have a choice, Lieutenant," Zaina said quietly. "You can attempt to stop us, triggering a confrontation that could harm all three of us. Or you can return to your station and report that you saw nothing unusual during the emergency." Dren's internal conflict was evident in the rippling of his scales. He had served under Zaina for 3 stellar cycles and had witnessed her unwavering loyalty to the fleet. "The Admiral will ask questions," he said finally. "And you will answer them truthfully," Zaina replied. "That during a Level 1 emergency, you followed protocols and secured critical sections. Nothing in your training requires you to anticipate the unprecedented." A long moment passed, the alarms continuing their urgent wail around them. Then, slowly, Dren lowered his weapon. 17 minutes until engineering discovers the anomaly," he said, his voice neutral. "The shuttle's tracking beacon activates automatically upon launch." Zaina understood his implicit message. "Thank you, Lieutenant." "I saw nothing," Dren replied, turning away. "Emergency protocols required my presence elsewhere." As he disappeared through the bay doors, Ethan released a breath. "That was close." "He is a good officer," Zaina said, feeling a pang of regret for the position she had placed him in. "Now, we must hurry." The shuttle systems came online as they boarded, responding to Zaina's command authorization. Her fingers moved rapidly across the control interface, bypassing safety protocols and disabling the tracking beacon. "Shuttle 7 initiating emergency departure," she announced for the benefit of the automated logs. "Evacuating due to potential drive containment failure." The bay doors slid open, revealing the star-studded vastness of space. With a subtle hum, the shuttle disengaged from its docking clamps and glided into the void. Ethan moved to stand beside her as she guided the craft away from the nebula seeker, accelerating once they cleared the ship's immediate vicinity. "I've never seen the stars like this," he murmured, gazing out at the unfiltered brilliance of space. "No atmosphere, no viewports, just us and the universe." Zaina felt something shift within her at his words. Us and the universe. It captured their situation with elegant simplicity. "The Meridian cluster is approximately 4 days at maximum sustainable speed," she told him, setting the course. "We should remain undetected if we stay within the radiation shadow of the Keelari Nebula." Ethan turned to her, his expression earnest. "I know what this cost you, Zaina. Your career, your standing, your home." She met his gaze steadily. "The Valari have a concept called Keltavan, the price of truth. It teaches that genuine understanding always requires sacrifice." "And what truth was worth this sacrifice?" he asked softly. The shuttle's artificial gravity stabilized as they accelerated to cruising speed, the stars outside stretching into streams of light. "That connection between different species can be more than clinical observation or strategic advantage," she answered. "That there is value in knowing you, Ethan Drake, that transcends scientific classification." He reached out, his fingers gently tracing the luminescent patterns on her face. This time, Zaina didn't hesitate. She leaned into his touch, her scales glowing with heightened intensity. "In human culture," Ethan said, his voice lower than usual, "we have many ways of forming connections. Some of them go beyond words." "Show me," Zaina whispered, her harmonics vibrating with emotions no Valari training had prepared her for. As the shuttle carried them through the star-dappled darkness, two beings from worlds light-years apart discovered new forms of communication, through touch, through gesture, through the silent language of bodies finding harmony despite their differences. In the small sanctuary of the shuttle, surrounded by the infinite expanse of space, Zaina and Ethan created something unprecedented in the annals of either of their species, a connection that defied classification, a union that transformed both without diminishing either. Hours later, as Ethan slept beside her, Zaina watched the stars streaming past and contemplated the vastness of what they had begun. Whatever awaited them in the Meridian cluster, sanctuary or pursuit, diplomatic crisis or new beginning, they would face it together, forever changed by what they had found in each other. The Meridian cluster gleamed against the velvet backdrop of space, its central space station a marvel of multi-species engineering. As their shuttle approached the massive structure, Zaina felt both apprehension and hope competing within her. "Unidentified vessel, this is Meridian Central Control," came a voice over the communication system. "State your purpose and authorization." Ethan looked at Zaina, his expression conveying silent support. They had discussed this moment extensively during their journey, how to approach the neutral territory, what to reveal, what to withhold. "Meridian Control, this is Commander Zaina Kavarin of the Valari Exploration Fleet," she responded, her voice steady despite her inner turmoil. "Requesting emergency diplomatic sanctuary under Article 7 of the Galactic Concord." There was a pause, then, "Valari vessel, transmit identification codes and specify the nature of your diplomatic emergency." Zaina sent her military credentials, still valid, though soon to be revoked once Admiral Tesvar discovered her desertion. "Accompanying me is Commander Ethan Drake, representative of Earth," she continued. "We seek neutral mediation for a first contact situation with significant diplomatic implications." Another pause, longer this time. Zaina could imagine the confusion her request was causing. Valari rarely sought diplomatic intervention, preferring to resolve issues through their rigid hierarchical structures. "Approach Docking Bay 17, the controller finally responded. "Security and diplomatic personnel will meet you upon arrival. Be advised that weapons are prohibited within the station." Acknowledged, Meridian Control. Proceeding to Bay 17. As Zaina guided the shuttle toward the designated docking area, Ethan placed his hand over hers on the control panel. Whatever happens, he said quietly, we've already changed history. No human has ever come this far into the galactic community with the knowledge we now share. Zaina felt her scales warm under his touch. And no Valari has ever experienced what I have with you, she replied. Perhaps that is the true value of our journey, not the diplomatic outcomes, but the proof that genuine connection across species is possible. The shuttle docked with a gentle shudder, mechanical arms securing it in place as atmospheric seals engaged. Ready? Ethan asked. Zaina nodded, taking a moment to straighten her uniform, a final gesture of respect for the culture she had chosen to defy for a greater truth. As the airlock cycled open, they were met by a delegation unlike any Zaina had encountered before, representatives from at least 5 different species, including a tall, silver-skinned Meridian diplomat and, surprisingly, a human female in formal attire. Commander Kavarin, the Meridian greeted her with a formal gesture. I am Ambassador Threll. Your request for sanctuary has been provisionally granted pending verification of your claims. The human woman stepped forward, her eyes fixed on Ethan with undisguised shock. Commander Drake? Earth Central has listed you as missing, presumed dead. What exactly is going on here? Counselor Nakamura, Ethan acknowledged, clearly surprised to find a human diplomat already established at the station. It's a long story, but the short version is that first contact between humans and Valari didn't go exactly according to anyone's protocol. Ambassador Threll gestured toward a corridor. Perhaps we should continue this discussion in more appropriate surroundings. The Concord chamber has been prepared. As they walked through the station, Zaina was acutely aware of the curious glances from beings of various species. The Meridian cluster was known for its diversity, but a Valari officer in the company of a human was evidently an unusual sight. The Concord chamber was an elegant space designed for diplomatic negotiations, its circular table symbolizing the equality of all parties. Once they were seated, Ambassador Threll activated a privacy field that would prevent external surveillance. Now, the Meridian said, explain the nature of this diplomatic emergency that brings a Valari commander and a human officer to our door seeking sanctuary. For the next 2 hours, Zaina and Ethan recounted their story, his capture, their conversations, the unexpected connections they had formed, and finally, the order for his transfer that had prompted their escape. The Valari Science Directorate has classified humans as a primitive species suitable for study rather than alliance, Zaina explained. But my direct experience contradicts this classification. Commander Drake has demonstrated capabilities and perspectives that suggest humans would be valuable allies. Counselor Nakamura looked troubled. The Earth Diplomatic Corps has been attempting to establish formal communication with the Valari for over a year, without success. Now you're telling me they've been observing us the entire time, with the intention of eventual conquest? Not conquest, Zaina corrected. Assimilation. The Valari believe in bringing order to what they perceive as less advanced civilizations. A distinction without much difference from our perspective, Nakamura noted dryly. Ambassador Threll's silver features remained impassive. This presents a complex diplomatic situation. The Meridian Collective maintains treaties with both Earth and the Valari Imperium. We cannot simply ignore the fact that Commander Kavarin has, by her own admission, violated her military protocols. With respect, Ambassador, Ethan interjected, she did so to prevent what would have been tantamount to an act of war against Earth. The forcible detention and experimentation on a human military officer would constitute a severe violation of interspecies law. A law the Valari have not formally recognized, Threll pointed out. But one the Meridian Collective has, Zaina countered. As signatories to the Galactic Concord, you are obligated to mediate this dispute according to established principles of sentient rights. A subtle expression, perhaps approval, flickered across Threll's features. You are well versed in diplomatic protocol for a military commander, Kavarin. I have had an excellent teacher in understanding perspectives beyond my training, Zaina replied, glancing at Ethan. The meeting continued as logistical and diplomatic details were discussed. The Meridian Collective would offer temporary sanctuary while formal communication channels were established between Earth's diplomatic corps and the Valari High Command. Both Zaina and Ethan would be granted diplomatic status during the negotiations. As the session concluded, Counselor Nakamura approached Ethan privately. "The brass back home will have questions, Drake. Lots of them." "I know," he acknowledged. "But what we've started here is worth it. The Valari aren't the enemy they might have become if we'd followed the expected paths." Nakamura studied him thoughtfully, then glanced at Zaina, who was engaged in conversation with Ambassador Threll. "There's more to this than diplomatic breakthroughs, isn't there?" Ethan didn't deny it. "She risked everything, her career, her standing, possibly her life, because she was willing to see beyond her training and recognize truth when she found it. How many of us can say the same?" Later, in the private quarters assigned to them, Zaina stood by the viewport overlooking the spectacular swirl of the Meridian cluster. Stars of various colors and intensities painted the darkness with light, much like the emotions that had transformed her previously ordered existence. "Credits for your thoughts," Ethan said, using an Earth idiom he had taught her during their journey. "I was contemplating symmetry," she replied. "When we first met, I was your captor, studying you as a specimen. Now, we are both effectively captives here, being studied by diplomats and bureaucrats." Ethan moved to stand beside her, his warmth a now familiar comfort. "With one critical difference, we chose this path together." "Indeed." Zaina turned to face him. "The Valari have a philosophy that the universe tends toward order, that chaos is a temporary state to be overcome. I believed this without question for most of my life." "And now?" Ethan asked. "Now I think perhaps true order emerges not from rigid classification, but from the harmony of differences." She reached out, tracing the contours of his face, still alien to her, yet now beloved in its uniqueness. "What we found between us defies categorization in either of our cultures. Yet it feels more right, more complete, than anything prescribed by tradition." Ethan drew her closer. "On Earth, there's an ancient concept called the third space, something new created when two different cultures meet and blend. Not one or the other, but something unique born from both." "A third space," Zaina repeated, liking the concept. "That is what we are creating, not just between us, but potentially between our peoples." Through the viewport, a ship bearing Valari markings appeared, moving toward the station. The response to their sanctuary request had arrived sooner than expected. "It begins," Ethan said quietly, noting the ship's approach. "It began the moment you looked at me not as an alien captor, but as a being capable of connection," Zaina replied. "Whatever diplomatic challenges await us, that truth remains." They stood together at the threshold of an uncertain future, representatives of worlds that had nearly become enemies, now championing a different possibility. The path ahead would not be easy, prejudices and protocols on both sides would resist change, and their personal relationship would face scrutiny from those who could not understand what they had discovered together. Yet as Zaina looked at Ethan, she felt a certainty that transcended the logical calculations of her Valari training. What they had begun in a cell on a research vessel, continued in a shuttle crossing the stars, and now brought to the galactic community was more than a diplomatic initiative. It was proof that the greatest discoveries came not from studying others as specimens, but from the courage to connect as equals, to learn about humans, and in the process, to learn what it truly meant to be Valari. "Are you ready?" Ethan asked as a communication alert chimed, announcing the imminent arrival of officials from both their worlds. Zaina's scales shimmered with a luminescence that, Ethan had told her, reminded him of Earth's dawn breaking over the ocean. "I am ready," she replied, taking his hand in hers. "For whatever comes next, as long as we face it together." And so, standing side by side, the Valari commander and the human officer prepared to welcome representatives of their respective worlds, no longer as captive and captor, specimen and scientist, but as pioneers of a new understanding that might, in time, transform the stars themselves.